Awesome. All right. Well, I think without further ado, we're ready to get started. Well, thanks again for joining everyone. So my name is Christopher Black. I'm a senior solutions engineer with CircleCI. And again, joining us is Cameron Gray. A quick run through of the agenda for the webinar we're going to go through today. Quick round of introductions, talk a little bit about who we are, myself, my background, Cameron, his background. Spend a little bit of time talking about CircleCI and more importantly, a really compelling feature we've released called Orbs. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about Convox, really awesome technology. Going to spend a bit of time talking about the Convox Orb, and then we're definitely going to save a dedicated 10, 15 minutes at the end for Q&A. All right, so again, Christopher Black, Senior Solutions Engineer at CircleCI. I normally don't rock a beard like this, but with everything going on, I think I've kind of let myself go. I've been writing a lot of code lately. But I've been with CircleCI for about 5 years, coming up on my 5-year anniversary. Some might say that's a lifetime in this industry, but I absolutely love the company, love the space, love the technology. My background's predominantly DevOps and infrastructure engineering. And I fell to the dark side, if you will, into a customer-facing engineer role about a year and a half, 2 years ago. Absolutely love it. Absolutely love getting in the weeds with customers and solving really interesting, technical issues as they relate to CI and CD. Turn it over to you, Cameron.
Yeah, so Cameron Gray, I'm co-founder of Convox. I'm actually a second generation co-founder, so not one of the originals, but been with Convox for about a year and a half. My background is mostly in engineering, VP of engineering, CTO at a whole bunch of startups over the last 15 or 20 years. And much like Chris, actually, have sort of pivoted to a more customer-facing role in my time at Convox and spent a lot of time working particularly with our enterprise customers and helping customer onboarding and just helping people make the best use of Convox. And I let my co-founder and our really smart engineers do the hardcore engineering work these days.
Awesome. And Cameron, just remind me, how many folks at Convox these days?
We're a pretty small team, so we're sort of less than 10 right now. Although we do some contract work when we need to get some extra horsepower. But yeah, we're a pretty small team.
Awesome, awesome. CircleCI, I hope most of you watching are familiar with CircleCI, perhaps heard of, hopefully use every day. But for those of you who aren't, CircleCI, we are a continuous integration platform, first and foremost. And our mission really is to make it as easy as possible to go from idea to delivery. And really what that means practically is narrowing, if not eliminating, the distance between idea and implementation. And we were founded back in 2011. We're still very much a startup. We're still very much in startup mode. In fact, we just raised our Series E, which is terribly exciting. But we've been around for a long time. We've been thinking about CI and CD day in, day out for years now. It's really interesting when you think that we've been around since 2011. The world has changed considerably since then. Technology has evolved considerably since then. This isn't a pre-Docker world, as hard as it is to imagine. And we re-architected the platform back in 2017. We had a major re-architecture where we went from 1.0 to 2.0, and that's where we started to embrace key technologies like Docker, like Kubernetes. We took our monolithic application framework, broke it up into a series of microservices, started embracing cloud-native principles, etc. But as a result of which, I think it's safe to say we are the world's largest, cloud-hosted CI/CD platform. We have a number of customers, and our customer base is very, very interesting. It ranges anything from 2dudesandapizza.com to some of the world's leading technology companies, and everything and anything therein is kind of serviced in our platform. And this is a nice visualization of where we think we are in the SDLC. CircleCI, continuous integration, continuous delivery. We're very much nestled in the center in between source code and a runtime environment, whatever that runtime environment might be, whether or not it's a mobile device, an EC2 instance. We're nestled comfortably in the middle of the SDLC, which is a really exciting place to be. Super, super, super quick platform demo. Cameron, can you still see my screen okay?
Yes, just fine.
Okay, awesome. Just making sure. So what we have here, everybody, I hope this isn't everybody's first time seeing a jobs page on Circle, but if it is, there's a lot going on. And what we have here is a very simple one-off Go application. And what we're going to do is we're just going to build this Go application on CircleCI, leveraging a makefile target. And so if I click rerun workflow right here, I've already added this project on the platform. I've already written my configuration file. But once I click Add Project in the UI and I write my config file, I pretty much have a fully scalable CI platform at my fingertips. Adding a new project really is just a matter of clicking Add Project in the UI. I write my configuration file, I'm good to go. I don't have to worry about setting up underlying build infrastructure. I don't have to worry about configuring webhooks. All of that underlying operational overhead is abstracted from the end user, which is very, very powerful. And so our super lightweight Go binary, we built this in 14 seconds, which is really awesome. And again, you can see here, there's not a ton going on in this build. It's a pretty simple one-off Go project. But if we were to apply this to a much more complicated application, you know, maybe like a Node.js application, for example, totally possible to build on the platform as well. But with that, I think I'm going to turn it back over to, oh, still got to talk about orbs for a little bit. So historically, oh my God. So historically on CircleCI, every project had its own configuration project. And historically, a project was very much a mapping to a Git repository. Well, as you can imagine, you're trying to onboard many, many dozens of projects. You have to write configuration files for each and every project. This is probably not a very scalable solution as you think about expanding this to more and more Git repositories. So we built this really compelling feature called orbs, which enable us to share and templatize bits and pieces of configuration, which is really, really powerful unto itself. But what orbs have also done on CircleCI is they've opened us up to integrate with a number of third-party technology providers and solutions in the form of orbs. And so we've seen this ecosystem, if you will, of orbs kind of develop organically, which has been terribly exciting. And Convox and a number of awesome technology partners all have orbs on their platform. Got some links to resources, and I think we will share this presentation for everybody at the end. And I think, Cameron, with that, I'm going to turn the mic over to you.
Yeah, so Convox, most importantly, it's a full platform as a service. So providing a complete DevOps infrastructure for people to deploy their applications. It's free and open source. We do have paid plans with support for larger organizations, but it's free for anybody to go out and use with the cloud of your choice. So speaking of that, works on AWS, Google Cloud, DigitalOcean, and Microsoft Azure, and maybe some more coming in the future. We're always working more on more cloud support. The history of Convox a little bit. It was started by some of the earliest engineers at Heroku. So sort of some of the first 5 or 6 folks there. So a lot of experience with platforms as a service, all the way to some very large scales. And, they really started Convox thinking like, okay, maybe there's a way to develop a platform that has the same type of experience, but it's free, it's open source, and is a bit more flexible. We like to think of it as sort of prescriptive, but flexible. So, smart defaults out of the box works just great the way you'd want, especially if you don't want to have to think about it. But then as you grow and your needs get more complex and, you want to sort of push the edges, there's a lot of flexibility in how Convox works. It came out of Y Combinator, which is a very well-known startup accelerator for those of us in the Bay Area, in the summer of 2015. And much like Chris was saying, Circle, we work for people running small side projects all the way up to, big multinational enterprises with thousands of developers. And, companies such as DoorDash, Teespring, Danone, Sallie Mae Bank, just a couple, kind of representing the wide swath of companies that are running on Convox.
That's awesome.
So, core features of the platform. So we have a fully automated configuration of your hosting environment, which means that we install a Kubernetes cluster in the cloud of your choice. And all you need to do is, create a security role for us to be able to do that. And it sets everything up. And those of you who have set up Kubernetes on your own probably would appreciate the niceness of having a one-click or a one-command way to do it. And so, as a full platform as a service, we of course offer one-click, zero downtime rolling deployments and instant rollbacks to any previous release, which is, one of those nice middle of the night, something went wrong kind of things. Full auto scaling, so it's very sort of hands off, and it can be configured for a bunch of different auto scaling parameters. You can really fine tune it to make sure that you're always at the scale that you need, but not spending money needlessly. Secrets management, so a full environment variable driven secrets management with encryption. So, you don't have things in like keys and whatnot is stored in code, all the good 12-factor practices that we strongly believe in.
Yeah.
And we support one-off commands. Those of you who've used platforms like Heroku are probably familiar with this, but one-off command is the ability to spin up a container running your code and to go execute a single command. The most common use case we see of this is running migrations. So I build a new release with my latest code. I spin up a one-off container that's running that new code while my customers are still being served by my existing live code. I migrate my database as long as we have backwards compatible migrations, which is just a good best practice in advance of the deployment. And then I can do a seamless zero downtime rolling deploy because my database has already been migrated to the new code. But one-off commands can also be used to power. We have a timer system for running things on a cron schedule, or maybe you just need to run a maintenance or a cleanup script, or maybe you need to actually poke around with your production running code to see a specific troubleshooting situation where it can only be done in production.
Yeah.
We also have robust automated load balancing configuration, including automated certificate generation. So you literally just say, look, this is the domain I want to host for, and we'll generate the certs automatically. It uses Let's Encrypt, and it happens instantaneously. So really, really a lot of the sort of plumbing and, the things that take time, we handle. And then a huge thing that we do that not a lot of other platforms do, because we're built on Kubernetes, because it's all container native, Docker native, we offer a local development environment. And it runs exactly the same stuff that the production one does. So you onboard a new developer, you get a new laptop. All you need to do is install Convox, clone your repo, and do Convox start, and you're up and running, with databases, services, everything that you need. So you're not, installing 5 or 6 things on your laptop and then hoping to keep them all running. So it's a big win.
Cameron, for the curious, is that very similar to something like Minikube, being able to spin up a lightweight cluster locally for local development?
Yeah. So for Linux, we would use Minikube or Micro-K8s, and then for the Mac or Windows, it's just Docker for Desktop, which has Kubernetes built in. So you just enable it, and then we run our local. So we install the Convox API and router inside of Kubernetes, and that's what the CLI or the web interface communicates with.
Gotcha. Awesome.
So, good question. Sort of dovetails into what's this all built on. So it's 100% Kubernetes native, and it automatically stands up a Kubernetes cluster, either locally or in the cloud of your choice. We refer to clusters as racks. So the rack is sort of the core Convox concept, and that's a deployable environment. So a rack, typically customers would have, a development rack, perhaps a staging rack, and a production rack. And so each rack can have as many apps as you want. So you think of your company, you run a whole bunch of apps. And then inside of an app is like a deployable thing that has multiple services that run inside of it. So you can think of it as, I have a staging and a production rack, and in that I deploy maybe my company's 2 main apps. And for one app, I might have, a web service and a backend API service, and maybe a database resource. So it's kind of the way we think about, how the nomenclature is. Under the hood, which is this is new with this latest version of Convox, we actually use Terraform to stand up the clusters. Yeah, it was a really big decision for us to do that, but a lot of our existing customers were already leveraging Terraform to manage lots of aspects of their infrastructure, and it gave us a lot of flexibility. So for somebody who's just wants a fully hands-off platform as a service, you don't need to know Terraform, you don't need to understand it. Like, we're going to do it behind the scenes. It's all just good defaults and hands-off for you. But for people who are already using Terraform and want to kind of mix and match their infrastructure, and they want to deploy a Convox rack alongside some other Terraform managed infrastructure, it provides a really nice sort of common set of tools, and they can do a lot of interesting things around sort of integrating Convox into a larger strategy.
Yeah, most definitely. I imagine Terraform under the hood has greatly enabled Convox to support multiple cloud providers and beyond.
It really made it so, the choice to do Kubernetes and the choice to do Terraform has made the multi-cloud thing, I wouldn't say easy. Every cloud has its unique challenges, but it was definitely made it a clear and manageable and maintainable path forward to do that.
The same is very much applicable to our cloud infrastructure here at CircleCI. It's a very interesting combination of Terraform, Kubernetes, Nomad, a couple other HashiCorp technologies under the hood, et cetera.
Yeah, it's a set of tooling that's increasingly popular.
Yeah.
We provide both a robust CLI and we have a web interface. So along with our sort of strategy of, hey, look, it's free, it's open source, single developer can use it for a side project too. I have giant enterprises. We sort of provide a whole spectrum there. So if you just want to use command line, you just want to work off the CLI, it works beautifully, it does everything. If you want a more sort of web interface experience, with nice graphs and everything's clickable, then we provide that as well. All the way up to, for our enterprise customers, we actually have a self-hosted web interface, so it runs inside of their cloud infrastructure. And they can sort of manage all their teams from there. And that's really, really useful for folks who have like PCI and HIPAA compliance concerns, GDPR, things like that, where, I want the platform as a service experience. I want, robust access control, single sign-on, all those things, but I want it isolated inside of my environment for, security or compliance reasons. And we offer that as well.
That's awesome. CircleCI comes in two flavors. Most of our customers leverage our cloud-hosted platform, but we have a self-hosted solution as well for the exact same reasons. There's just a small subset of customers, regulatory compliance or something, more or less necessitating that they bring the infrastructure in-house for whatever reason. And having the ability to service those customers is really powerful.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so they don't want to go building these tools for themselves, but they want the security. So it's a very similar setup. Yeah. So along the lines of some of the questions you asked, why did we go with Kubernetes? It's increasingly popular, but it's not without its challenges. So the original version of Convox, when we launched 5 years ago, it was built on ECS, which is Amazon's container service, and uses something called CloudFormation, which is their sort of templating system for configuring things. So you can think that it takes the place of Terraform in the Kubernetes case. That's worked really well for us. We still have a lot of customers that are running on that. It's powering a bunch of stuff, and it's great. But when we sort of were thinking last year, like, okay, what's the latest version of Convox going to look like? Kubernetes was really becoming, kind of where everybody was going. We were hearing it from a lot of our customers. These are big initiatives. We really want to be on Kubernetes. The reasoning was a little bit all over the board. A lot of it, honestly, was just like, hey, this is the very popular new thing, and we want to run on it. But it is becoming the standard for where people run their containerized apps. So, we felt like it was appropriate for us to at least look at it. And we dug into it, and we found that very robust, very powerful, has the convenience of working nearly the same on every cloud. There's a lot of interesting sort of quirks here and there, but from an end user perspective, it's pretty much handled at the cloud provider level. So you ask for a certain type of resource, and each cloud knows, like, oh, this is how we do load balancing on GCP versus AWS. And to you, it's all just Kubernetes. And then from a performance standpoint, because we don't have this sort of ECS task CloudFormation layer on top of things, you get really, really fast deploys and more importantly, super fast rollbacks, which is, having fast deploys is a convenience and efficiency thing. Having fast rollbacks is like a, downtime prevention, really important kind of thing. So in practice, we found that to be a huge gain over running ECS and CloudFormation.
Interesting. Once upon a time at Circle, before we replatformed, we were leveraging ECS, I think, for our front end. Once upon a time, we had a pretty good experience with it, but for all the reasons you mentioned and more, we just found that Kubernetes was the right choice for us at that
Yeah,
point.
ECS is a great platform. I'm not,
Yeah.
you know, but you know, this allows us to have one platform for every cloud, and you know, it works the same on all of them, and that's a really big win for
Yeah.
us. So speaking of Kubernetes, those of you who have built it out yourselves know that while it's awesome and it's very powerful, it's not exactly easy to work with necessarily. There's a lot of tooling, there's a lot of complexity. And I think about this. This is a quote that we threw around a lot at Convox, which is just so great. This is Kelsey Hightower, who's staff developer advocate at Google Cloud, and quite literally the guy who wrote the book on Kubernetes.
Big fan of Kelsey Hightower.
Yeah,
Big fan of Kelsey Hightower.
Renowned Kubernetes expert. But he was in a Twitter conversation about, you know, should companies who are in the business of building apps be building Kubernetes? And I just love this quote, which is, Kubernetes is for people building platforms. Yeah. If you're building your own platform, App Engine, Cloud Foundry, Heroku clone, then Kubernetes is for you. And we thought, hey, that's us. Like, that's what we do. Yeah. And so I think that as a company, you know, certainly in the sort of smaller to mid-size range, you know, do you really want to be putting all the DevOps resources into building out your own Kubernetes clusters and managing them? Because with that power, there's a lot of work and, you know, a lot of complexity. Whereas if you're in the platform building business, for us, it's worth it to take that effort and to gain that expertise because we're powering a lot of customers on it, and you know, we're leveraging those skills across a wide base. And you know, you just get to the next slide. I thought, you know, while Kelsey's quote is great, this is from a Convox customer who had previously managed his own Kubernetes resources, and I thought that Jim put it even better. You know, he says, you know, due to the complexity of Kubernetes, most engineers don't want to touch it. You know, he'd become a bottleneck for managing it himself as sort of the single sort of expert, and he really wanted to spread that DevOps responsibility across his entire team. And you know, we allow him to do that, and that's, you know, I think really Jim captures the spirit of why Convox exists and what we do for our customers, which is, you know, they want to focus on building their applications. They're in the business of serving their customers. You know, they don't want to build out giant DevOps teams just to be able to manage things. You know, DevOps has a very critical role in every organization, and you know, most of our customers have somebody who's at least part-time focused to a DevOps role. But you know, it's very much a service role inside the organization, and you know, their core business is serving their customers with their products. So you know, we want to take as much of that load off as we possibly can, and you know, really provide a robust and maintainable system.
Yeah, that's very much our philosophy, but in the context of CI/CD, we recognize that most developers and most organizations don't want to grind their teeth and come up with some homegrown CI tool or spend a bunch of time babysitting Jenkins. They want to come in, want to write quality application code, and they want to deliver value to the business.
Yeah, exactly. So speaking of CI tools, you know, the Convox org. So we've been Circle customers for a long time. I personally been a Circle customer since Circle got started, and you know, are huge fans. We use Circle to run a bunch of stuff that we build, but we also have a lot of our customers use Circle. I would guess, I don't have the exhaustive survey, but probably most of them do. And so it was, you know, a very logical thing for us to build an org because, you know, our customers were already using Convox with Circle. And you know, we thought we'd make it even easier for them. So they were already using it because Convox has this thing called the deploy key, which is basically a token that you can use to run the Convox CLI from pretty much any external system. So, you know, allows us to plug into a whole bunch of CI/CD tools, whether they're homegrown or commercial, including Circle. And that was how people were using Convox with Circle before, although they were kind of on their own to you know, put the commands in and do all the work. And so, you know, building the orb made it so that it's just literally one command, you know, in your workflow, and you're up and running. So really, really simple. really easy to use. And with the new version of Convox, it allows you to deploy to one or many clouds in a single workflow, which is really pretty powerful. And I think that if you pair that with the fact that Convox works the same on every cloud because of all this sort of Kubernetes native infrastructure that we've built, it allows you to do some really interesting things with the multi-cloud deployments with Circle. So you could, for example, say, I want to run my staging environment on DigitalOcean because it's really cheap. But I want to run my production environment on AWS because I feel like it's going to scale better or be more manageable or, you know, whatever, or integrate with other systems. And so now with every deploy, I can, hey, my workflow deploys my staging environment out to DigitalOcean and it deploys production to AWS. Or you could say, look, you know, the data science team really wants to deploy to Google Cloud because they feel like that's the best place to run their stuff. But our, you know, web app team is all in on AWS. You know, and I don't want to have two different deployment pipelines. Okay, great. You know, you can have one workflow deploy these things to two places. Or, you know, I want to deploy a backup every single time to another cloud for something super mission critical, right? Or maybe, you know, for whatever reason, you want to serve some subset of your customers from one cloud and another subset of your customers from another cloud for, you know, a regional concern or a compliance concern or whatever, but you just have, you know, the one code base and you want it to deploy seamlessly every time. And we'll let you do that as well.
Yeah, awesome. So I pull in the org, I reference the org in my configuration file. I I imagine I specify a rack. And then the only other thing I need on top of that is the API token.
Correct. Which you would set in your as an environment variable inside of Circle, right? So that you have that circuit, just like our secrets management, it works the same as yours, right? You want those secrets stored in the environment as opposed to exposed anywhere.
Love it. And then boom, I can just seamlessly deploy to, you know, Kubernetes clusters across multiple clouds.
Exactly.
Oh, love it. Love it.
So just a quick sort of little bit of a technical dive into how it all works. For Convox, we describe an app using a manifest. It looks a lot like Docker Compose.
I was going to say, I think I might have seen this before.
Yeah, in sort of very early versions of Convox, we actually used Docker Compose. And then we sort of over time realized that we needed to support some configuration stuff that was, you know, we were really kind of banging up against the way Docker Compose works because it's not meant to do this. So we create our own manifest, but it's, you know, simple YAML, pretty straightforward. In this little example, I wanted to sort of keep it simple, but also show a little bit of the, you know, what you can do. This is an example of a simple Node app, two services, a web service and an API service, maybe a backend API, and it uses a Redis database. So we define databases as resources. So we just resource database type Redis. By default, this will run this Redis database in a container. So really great for local development and works great for production development as well. We do have this concept of resource overlays where you can say, no, in production, I want to run, you know, say Elasticache in a Redis mode, or if I'm using MySQL or Postgres, maybe I'm using RDS or, you know, whatever your cloud equivalent is. And we of course support that. And so, so we define each service. So we name the service web, build is just which Docker file am I using? In this case, they both use the same Docker file. What port is it bound to? What's the startup command to run, which could also be in a Docker file. This is where we are defining environment variables that are required. In this case, we just have an environment variable called port. It's somewhat arbitrary, and you can give it a default value, but you can then override those values with a you know, an environment set, so that you have, say, a set of environment variables for your staging rack and a set of values for production rack, for example.
Oh, I see. Yeah, and to be able to group those values.
Right, exactly. So again, you're not, you know, putting things in code or modifying values on the fly when you do deployments and things like that. And then when we define a resource database in the service, that's telling Convox, hey, the web service needs to use the resource that we call the database, which in this case is our Redis database. What that's going to do is automatically inject an environment variable called Redis called database URL into the container running the web service, and that's going to have the full endpoint, including username and password, to access that resource. So again, very, very seamless connection of services, and you're not exposing secrets, you're not exposing configuration. So if you're, most things like, Rails apps and things like that, this just works out of the box. You don't have to do anything. So very, very seamless, but you can also inject your own environment variables to use for whatever purposes you have. Awesome. And we can jump on to take a look at the orb. So as you were alluding to previously, using the orb is really quite simple.
Yeah.
We have a single command for deploy. We'll probably over time add a couple of other features of the Convox CLI, but right now it just deploys. It's the single most important thing you need to do. Yeah. So in this case, those of you who aren't familiar with the way orbs work, you specify any orbs that you want to bring in to your workflow, and then you specify any jobs that you want to run, and inside of the jobs, you want to use what executor you're using and what are the steps that you're going to use. So in this case, we have a single job called deploy. Its executors the Convox CLI, and the steps are really, really simple. We're going to check out the latest version of the code, and then we're going to run the Convox deploy command specifying what rack we want to go to, in this case, DO test, which is like DigitalOcean test rack, and then what app we want to deploy. So this app is called Node Demo. In production, of course, you would be doing a bunch of other stuff with Circle, right? Running your tests using parallelization, maybe you have some configuration work you want to do, notifications, etc.
Yeah. And this would likely come at the terminus of a workflow.
Exactly.
Most important, most exciting part of the workflow, but yeah, likely at the end.
Yeah, and then the only other piece you need, as you said, is you have to set your Convox deploy key in your CircleCI environment.
Yeah.
And you can create, on the Convox side, you can create as many deploy keys as you need, and then you can revoke those, or so you would create a deploy key just for Circle, and then put that in here.
Yeah, could also use a context. Context might be context are effectively shared groupings of environment variables that are set at a job level. It might be overkill for a simple one-off API token, but just something to point out to our users. One thing, while we're still talking about orbs, I forgot to mention at the beginning of the webinar, we talk a lot about orbs in the context of really exciting third-party technology providers. Anybody can create an orb. Any CircleCI user can create their own orb, they can publish an orb, and they can reap the benefits of being able to templatize and share bits and pieces of configuration across the entire ecosystem. So just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, we have internal orbs that use our orb,
right.
Which is a pretty common practice, I would imagine.
Yeah, and much like Docker files and Docker images, orbs can then reference other orbs, and it can get pretty interesting. Oop. Right.
Oh yeah, so I think we've got a little bit of a demo. I'm not quite as brave as you, so I pre-recorded my demo, but it is real time, so there's no editing tricks.
Gonna let you drive.
Okay. Yeah. Give me just a second to swap over my screen here. Hopefully you're seeing it, Chris.
Yep.
All right, and just give me a thumbs up if so that you hear, if you make sure you hear the audio.
Yep, will do.
All right, let's demonstrate deploying to two clouds using Convox and CircleCI and the Convox orb. So we have here a very simple app. It's just a little node app. Take a look at it, and you can see it couldn't be more simple. All it does is when you hit the root of the web app, it kicks out a hello world message. I think we've all built these before 1,000 times, so nothing too fancy about that. I've already deployed this app to a couple of clouds, so we're going to make a change and deploy it again using the Convox orb. So the first thing we want to do is take a look at where it's running already. So I'm going to bring up my list of Convox racks, and I'm just going to filter this list to my demo organization to reduce the noise because I have a bunch of racks installed on my machine. And we can see that we have 3 racks here. One's AWS, one's DigitalOcean, and one's GCP. So let's take a quick look at the AWS rack. So we'll go ahead and connect to that rack. This is just connecting our CLI to the AWS rack. And we'll see what apps are running on that rack. You can run as many apps as you want on your racks. And it looks like this no demo app is running. And let's go ahead and see what services it has running. It's like we have an API service and a web service. The web service is the one we just looked at. So let's go ahead and grab the URL for that. This is the Convox auto-generated URL, also certificate automatically generated. But of course, you can specify a custom domain for your actual production apps. And we'll just go ahead and open this in a browser. And it looks like it says hello world, which is what we expected. So clearly it's working. And then let's go ahead and switch over to our GCP rack. And take a look at the services for that rack. And there's that URL. So we'll grab that guy and open it and put it in another browser window. Looks like that's working as well. Great. Switch this view back over to Circle. And then let's take a quick look at our Circle config. And looks pretty simple. We're going to use the Convox orb, the latest version. We're going to define one deploy job. Its executor is going to be the Convox CLI, and it's just got a couple of steps. We're going to check out the latest code. We're going to deploy to the GCP rack, app node demo, and then we're going to deploy to the AWS rack, app node demo. I mean, obviously in production, you run your tests, you do a bunch of other stuff, but this is just trying to keep it as simple as possible. So that all looks good. So let's go ahead and make a change to our app. Oops, wrong directory. So we'll go down here and we'll just say, let's have the message say, hello from Convox and CircleCI. We'll save that change. And then we'll go ahead and commit our change, of course. Update message seems like as good a commit message as anything. All right, we made that commit. And let's go ahead and push that up to GitHub. Looks like that worked. Flip back over here. And as we expected, it's kicked off a job in Circle. So let's dig into this workflow a little bit. It's spinning up our environment, grabbing the image for the latest Convox CLI, and started our deploy already. So I believe the first deploy was GCP. Well, that was fast, 9 seconds. And then the second deploy is AWS. And obviously these deploy speeds can vary depending on how large your app is, how many services you have, and also how recently you run a deploy, because things get cached all through the pipeline. I've run this one very recently, so obviously the GCP stuff was cached and really deployed very, very quickly. But in general, it can take just a few seconds for a smaller app. And it looks like AWS is finished deploying. So all in all, that took less than a minute. I don't want to guarantee it's always going to be that fast. And then let's go over and take a look, see if our message has been updated. Looks like it has on GCP, or sorry, that's AWS. And let's go over to GCP. And it looks like it worked there too. So there you go. You deployed an updated change to Kubernetes clusters on 2 clouds at once in less than a minute.
That motivates me, Cameron. Nicely done. That was great. I know you've been in the industry for a long time. You've probably worn lots of hats. Have you been a solutions engineer at some point?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've probably done it all.
Yeah.
A bunch of titles, but yeah, I was, originally back in the day where we actually racked and stacked our own servers and things like that. And so us app developers were doing cabling too. So yeah, I've definitely kind of done everything.
Love it. Love it. Question about the executor you referenced in the Convox orb. Is that just like an Alpine image with the CLI pre-installed?
Exactly.
Okay.
It's not Alpine; it's based off of Ubuntu, but yeah, it's just our own Docker image that we maintain that just has our CLI installed.
Sure.
And so that pattern works really well for us because then we can keep everything up to date and maintain it smoothly without breaking anything for anybody, and customers don't have to go update anything. They just grab the latest version of the orb and they're good to go.
That's awesome. And that's the only dependency on that Docker image, just the CLI?
Correct.
Awesome. Awesome. Cameron, did we have any other slides or should we turn it over to Q&A?
I think that's it. I think we have slides with just the links for where to find us and things like that. That's probably more useful for people who grab it after the webinar anyway.
Yeah, awesome. And would like to remind all of our participants that we are going to be sending out that deck as well for everybody's future reference. Well, with that in mind, would love to turn it over to the audience for Q&A. Cameron, I've got a good question just to kind of kick things off. Would love to hear more about maybe if you have any data or anecdotes on what your most popular cloud might be. What you're deploying to most frequently, just for the curious.
Yeah, I would say that AWS is still our most popular cloud. And I think maybe that's probably indicative of a couple things. One, that we used to be an AWS only solution. So obviously we're sort of associated with that, and a lot of our existing customer base are on AWS. And then also, AWS still sort of dominates this space. I will say we're seeing growth across all of them though. And particularly for smaller projects, DigitalOcean's become very, very popular. People love to use it to just try stuff out.
Yeah.
I will say the other thing, and it's a really important thing to highlight about Convox, especially for startups, is because we just integrate with your cloud. So you set up a role, you integrate your cloud account with us, and then we instrument things. We're not reselling you cloud resources. You have an account with your cloud provider, and you maintain that account, which for startups is super important because of credits, right? So people can get credits for different cloud providers and apply them to sort of maximize their runway as a startup, and so it's really, really important. And so that's a big deal. A lot of customers will say, like, look, I love the platform, but I want to be on this cloud because I can get a bunch of credits for that cloud, and we're happy to help enable that. So that's a big thing for us, and that's one of the reasons we see people picking different clouds.
Interesting. Very interesting about DigitalOcean. It was my understanding when I used DigitalOcean years ago, I generally think of DigitalOcean for maybe one-off projects, for enthusiasts, for folks who are just getting into development. Would love to hear just a tiny bit more about some of the use cases you're seeing on DigitalOcean. Some of the folks who are leveraging that platform, because it's super easy to use. I remember the first time I deployed a droplet, it was wicked straightforward. Yeah,
it's definitely super easy to use, and people associate it with just getting a space, getting a droplet, something really quick and easy. But they are also sort of all in on their Kubernetes solution, and they have a good Kubernetes solution. So I think that I would say that we're still seeing it mostly in sort of I wouldn't say hobbyist is not quite fair, but people who are, running smaller apps, people who are super cost sensitive, and or the use case I highlighted before, like I want to run a development or staging or an experiment on something cheaper, and I'm less concerned with being able to leverage other services or scale. I mean, because I would say, from a reliability standpoint, it's really not fair to try to compare, and every cloud has their issues and things like that. But where there is a major difference is that Azure and GCP and AWS provide a much broader set of other services, right? So in the case of AWS, thousands and thousands of services. So a lot of it kind of depends on if you just want to run apps self-contained, in containers on a cluster, and you're not sort of leveraging the broader ecosystem of any given cloud, DigitalOcean's a great choice.
Awesome. Yeah, well said. Well said. So we do have a couple of questions from the viewers. So Neil, thanks for the question. Neil asks, any plans to add more commands to the orb? Our circle config needs to create the app, parentheses, if not exist, set app params if needed, deploy, then adjust scale, parens maybe. We've had to write our own tooling to support this today.
Yeah, so we are definitely working on that. One of the things that sort of we want to be really thoughtful about is security. So whenever we enable things for executors that can be run on third-party systems, we just really want to make sure that we're not enabling accidentally the ability to sort of like leak secrets out of a system or things like that. And so that's why we've been sort of very thoughtful about what we enabled. And we're also, the orb is relatively new for us, and so we kind of wanted people to use it and get more feedback. But yes, there will be more features coming to the orb.
Awesome. Yeah, great question. Mariano asked, what's the advantage of using the orb versus just issuing convox deploy as a command from CircleCI? I could try to answer this, but would love to would love to hear your thoughts. The benefits to using an orb, I mean, aside from just the syntactic sugar, you don't have to worry about configuring the CLI or pulling the CLI in. It just it makes the config significantly more readable. And presumably you've got a workflow. Hopefully you're incorporating other orbs, maybe a Slack notification. You're doing some kind of static code analysis. But those are the first things that come to my mind. Just the syntactic benefits of the orb itself.
Yeah, I would say similar. The two things that stand out for me, one is if you're leveraging the CLI directly, which is great. If we change anything, if there's updates, stuff like that, like you're kind of, it's up to you to make sure that gets maintained from your perspective. I mean, it's unlikely, but it could happen. And so something where we're maintaining the full pipeline is great. We're always making sure the latest CLI gets downloaded, all that kind of stuff. But then also, as you were saying, I think when you start to add a bunch of stuff to your workflow, having these sort of layers of abstraction where you're just got deploy down to one command as opposed to okay, install the CLI and then do this thing, and now I've got 5 or 6 other things that are happening. My workflows get really massive. It just makes it easier to read and easier to maintain. So that would be the other benefit.
Yeah, well said, Cameron. I guess the 2 words in sum would be readability and maintainability. Yeah, and again, hopefully, as part of your workflow, as part of your pipeline, you're pulling in other orbs to do other things. We still have a couple minutes left. Would love to turn it over to the audience for more Q&A. But in the interim, Cameron, do you want to talk at all about maybe the architecture of Convox?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm not the absolute expert or best person to talk about it. A lot of people smarter than I am that do the heavy lifting on the back end. But yeah, Convox is, it's built all in Go, which has become the sort of, I would say, the predominant language for people who are doing, infrastructure tooling for sure.
Across the board, yeah. HashiCorp, Big Go Shop. A lot of people are doing some really cool stuff with Go. Yeah,
and it's also, because of that, if you're doing infrastructure work, it's also where you can sort of get the best libraries and the best open source projects and things like that. So it's all Go. Architecture is basically, we have a couple of different components, the rack being the sort of core component, and then we have kind of a provider model for local rack and all the different clouds and things like that. I don't know, I'm trying to think what are the sort of key highlights. And then we have the separate, the only part that's closed source is our console, which is our web control plane, which is what gets installed either using our public multi-tenant console or using a privately installed version of it. Gotcha. But yeah, I mean, other than that, it's all open source, so you can just go take a look at it yourselves and poke around and see the work we've done.
That's awesome. Cameron, if you want to talk at all about maybe your ideal customer profile, who are the folks who are most leveraging Convox most heavily, and also maybe getting the most out of it?
Yeah, I tend to sort of think of the customers as fitting into kind of 3 buckets. So we've got early stage, I'm just up and running, maybe a 1-person shop or just a couple of folks. I'm not really in a place to build out a team. somebody who might have used a platform like Heroku, right? But I also want to use my credits and I want to, do this as cheaply as I possibly can. And I just want things to work right. And I don't want to make any mistakes. So definitely a ton of people who fit in that category who are using Convox. In the middle, we see people who are at scale. And they're either sort of faced with managing their own infrastructure and building out big DevOps teams, and that just feels really daunting or expensive, or in this hiring landscape, just hard, maybe not even possible. And they don't want to use platform as a service that's reselling infrastructure, because as you scale, it just gets super expensive, right? Like just really expensive. And you're not able to leverage, negotiated pricing and things like that you might have if you're able to work with a cloud directly. So we have a lot of customers that fit in that category too. And that's actually a place where we, onboard people really a lot. And then the third one's enterprise. So that's a big category for us. And, the major drivers there, security, compliance, things like that, but in a lot of interesting ways. So if you think about the way, say, a big bank that's moving from on-prem or in a managed data center to cloud, and how they might do that, they typically have been doing it sort of one app or one team at a time. And it's a really laborious process for them, because every new app that they want to migrate or lift and shift, or whatever, maybe it's new, has to go through a configuration, security. They have a whole team that sets up just network permissions, ACLs, IAM configuration, all that kind of stuff. And then somebody else is doing this data code analysis and making sure the containers are set up correctly, Docker images are secure, all that kind of stuff. And so that process gets repeated every single time. And so for the enterprise customers that leverage Convox, what they find is they now have a private platform as a service, and they can just onboard the teams. The racks are already set up. And so the teams just say, look, I build my Convox config and I deploy, and that already gets deployed on our audited and maintained images. It runs through, it installs Twistlock if that's what we're running. Like, whatever those parameters are, they're repeated automatically for every deployed app and every deployed rack. And they don't have to go through this process every time they move a new app up. And that's a really big deal.
For sure, yeah, and especially in the enterprise context, those engineers, they just have the rack has been certified, the security team plus one to the rack, they just deploy to the rack.
Exactly. And then the other thing is, of course, there's a big cost savings, because you're running one cluster, but you might have hundreds of apps deployed on that cluster, right? And because of the auto scaling and the way you sort of specify what resources your services need, you're making the maximum amount of use of the underlying instances. As opposed to sort of, in traditional land, like, okay, a certain number of instances for every app that gets run, whether or not they're being used at any given period of time. So, there's a huge economy of scale to be gained there.
That's a really interesting point. Yeah, especially in the context of auto scaling, depending on how, I'm just going to use AWS as an example because I'm most familiar with AWS, but depending on how you have your auto scaling configured, you've got the simple one-off app, it's not very resource intensive, but you're running a ton of like C4.16 XLs, and then you get your AWS bill at the end of the month, and there's a lot of sadness.
Right.
There's a lot of sadness in some conversations. Yeah, interesting. So there's a financial component as well.
Yeah, because you can run a cluster, production cluster with, we require at least 3 instances just to maintain viability. But beyond that, you can run 3 big guys, and then you can deploy a ton of apps on it, and it's going to make the maximum use of that cluster, and it'll scale appropriately.
That's awesome. Yeah, I didn't even think about the financial ramifications with that. That's a really, really interesting point as well.
Yeah.
Final call for Q&A for our audience members. But if there are no other questions, Cameron, this was great. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Chris. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Looking forward to talking to you soon. And thank you for everybody for joining.
Thank you.